Thank you for having me. So I want to talk about integrating sustainability criteria in credit risk assessment, some results that we found and future research needs as well. And so just to specify, so I'm talking about kind of commercial loans. So that's not like, what big rating agencies where you get a credit score, but it's commercial loans that are assessed individually. And so think back when we started, there was 1995, James Bond fans, that was GoldenEye, Tina Turner, quite a long time ago. And so, but at the same time, we had the introduction of new environmental regulations in the world. So, and that's often forgotten. So it was in Europe, and Superfund, for instance, in the US, was introduced at that time. And so there were many credit managers, many bankers that looked like the guy here that didn't know what to do now because they were not used to address any kind of environmental issues in their job, of course. So then we started assessing, are there any risks, credit risks based on these new environmental regulations? And then, of course, we found some. So there were some bankruptcies so credit defaults, and then we found that some of the lenders could not sell the collateral as usual because it was contaminated. So at least they had to decontaminate it, but it was connected with cost. And so we did our first study there in 1995. And of course, when we communicated that to the financial industry, and we can see how much things changed, they said there's no credit default because of environmental reasons, it's always financial reasons. So they didn't even understand what's going on in the field. And so we came up with some examples of that. But then the question is, how can you integrate that into your assessment? Because at the end, a credit manager wants to know what kind of criteria can I use to assess these types of risks to have a better credit risk prediction at the end. They don't want to police the companies with regard to environmental issues, but they want to have a better credit risk prediction at the end. And so what we did then, we did studies on integrating sustainability criteria and how they can increase the credit risk predictability. So the question is, if you have a traditional system that you use in credit risk assessment, what happens if you add environmental, social, and other sustainability indicators to that system? And so we started in Europe with banks, and that's important maybe also for future outlook. That's nothing you can get from databases. You have to go there, and you have to ask them for data, because otherwise you don't get any data on commercial loans, because that's all private. They don't want to publish them. And so we did studies in Europe, we did studies in Asia, and currently we are doing a study in Nigeria with banks to figure out what kind of sustainability criteria help. And very important here as well, you have to be very individual. Why we tend to say, okay, this, as we heard in the beginning, emissions is one thing, I totally agree, but it might be in banks in different regions with different types of clients, you need different indicators to predict the risks. And so we did that and came up with some research there, and kind of could improve the predictability of credit risks by about 5% by adding sustainability indicators. And so we did some studies that tried to figure out whether they use them. And so in the meantime, banks are using that. But what we found is that still there's a big gap between the environmental people and the credit people. So you have some environmental data, you have some financial data. It's tough to integrate both. And then the next question is, what does it help if we do more green? So with the background, China and other countries that have green credit regulations, the question is, does it really help? And we did some studies there as well and could show that. And finally, just to finish, in a very similar vein, we try to assess now how carbon costs can be integrated into these credit risk assessment schemes. We use the Altman Z scores and other types of credit risk assessment, and try to figure out how what are these carbon costs doing to credit risks. And the interesting point is, of course, that high emitting industries have a look at Canada or other countries that are often dependent on them, have a higher risk in credit risk default if we have a higher credit price. And then I'm done with that. Thank you.